Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Cutler. Thank you all for joining us today. Hope you're all doing well. I'm joined today by Ryan Jenkins, who will bring market insight into the generational gap and why it exists. Welcome, Ryan.
Hello, everyone.
We're very excited to have you here today. I'll give some quick housekeeping information for our audience today and then introduce Ryan. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please click the Ask a Question button below the video to ask your questions throughout the webinar. Ryan has also provided a live polling link that is available in the Resources tab that you can use to ask a question directly. Also, as a reminder, the recording will be available tomorrow. Ryan Jenkins is an internationally recognized keynote speaker, virtual trainer, and author. He recently wrote the book, The Generation Z Guide, the complete manual to understand, recruit, and lead the next generation. For a decade, he has helped organizations optimize generational dynamics, lessen worker loneliness, and prepare for the future of work. Ryan's top-ranked insights have been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and the Wall Street Journal. He is also co-founder of Sync Learning Experiences, a learning and development consultancy, redefining how workers gain modern skills. Thank you, Ryan, for taking the time to be here with us today, and I'll let you take it away from here.
Thanks, Julia. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. The topic today is lead and work across generations. I'm going to give you some specific strategies to connect and engage a multi-generational workforce. So let's start here. Did you know that 75% of managers report that managing a multi-generational team is a challenge? Secondly, 77% of workers identify different work expectations across generations as a challenge. And thirdly, 72% of workers identify a lack of comfort with younger employees managing older employees. So no matter how you slice the generational conversation, there's tension, there's friction here. So if you are experiencing cross-generational frictions, my friend, you are not alone. So today we're going to unpack all of this, and here's the overview and payoff of our time together today. Today's workforce is more generationally diverse than ever before, as we'll soon see, and it's resulting in a clashing of work styles, communication preferences, and leadership expectations. And today you'll discover why this is all happening, and then I'm going to give you some simple yet mighty solutions to work and lead across generations to improve engagement and performance amongst your team and throughout the organization. So that's the overview and payoff of our time together. And here's specifically how our time is going to be structured. We're going to talk about generations. Who are they? Why the gap? And how the gap was created across generations. Then I'm going to give you some strategies to work and lead across generations. Then we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. And towards the end as well, we'll be doing a virtual competition where you will have an opportunity to win my latest book, a hard copy of my latest book, which is the Generation Z Guide, which is all about who is Generation Z and how do we effectively attract them into our organizations and how will we best lead this next generation. And then if you want any more information about the work that I do or follow the blog or subscribe to our podcast, just visit ryan-jenkins.com. All right, we're going to be doing some live polling today. So I want you to pull out an internet-connected device. I recommend your phone, but you can open up another tab on your browser if you'd prefer. And visit this link, pollev.com/live poll. pollev.com/live poll. And as Julia mentioned, I believe underneath this video, there should be a live polling tab or the link is provided there as well. So you can simply click that if you prefer. But here's how it will work. When you arrive at this link, and when I prompt the polling slide, you will simply see a question and the potential responses. You click or tap whatever you believe to be the right answer, and we'll see your results live on the screen. It's as simple as that. All right, so here we go. The first question is simply, where are you today? We're all working remotely these days, so I'm curious to know, where are you today? And I know I'm sure we've got some Canadians joining us. So do your best to click where closest you are above the US, or if you're even outside the US, somewhere else outside of North America, do your best to click wherever is closest. But I love asking this question because, yes, while we're more separated and distanced from each other than ever before, wow, technology is really able to connect us, right? and we have people in every time zone across the whole country here, and yet we're all still participating and engaged in this single event together. Thank you, technology. So I also wanted to get you warmed up to the technology too, because we'll be using the polling throughout our time together. And we still got plenty of pins coming in. And you know what? I'm going to be playing along as well. And I am coming to you today from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm pretty happy with that pin. All right. Well, very good. Again, we've got folks from across the country. Love seeing that. Even, well, someone thought they were in Alaska. They perhaps just fat thumbed it. Someone's trying to figure out if this is live. I love it. All right. Keep those devices out. Here's your next question. And it simply is, what is your generation? And I should say, if you're watching the pre-recorded version of this, you won't be able to chime in live. I'm so sorry, but the questions that we cover throughout the polling and the responses from today's live audience should be insightful nonetheless. But again, you won't be able to interact live. All right, since we're talking about generations today, I always want to understand the breakdown of the audience. It looks like we have most Gen Xers, followed by some Millennials and Boomers, and we even got some Gen Zers. So this is fantastic because these are the four major generations in the workforce today, and these are the four major generations that we'll be discussing at length today. So that's great. I'm so glad we've got representation from all four of those generations. All right, here's a quick snapshot of the generations. Middle column is done by age as of 2020. The right side, that's how large the generations were at their peak in the United States. Notice those two asterisks in the bottom right. Those represent that those generations aren't that large anymore, unfortunately, due to folks passing away, but it still gives you a good sense of how the generations have stacked up over the years. Now, anytime you or I are talking about generations today and moving forward into the future, it is absolutely critical that we note this. All right, you ready? Anytime we're talking about generations, we have to note this. Generations are clues. They're not absolutes. They're clues. They're not absolutes. But in my opinion, and I think you're going to agree with me after our time together, they're very big clues on how you lead, communicate, recruit, sell, fill in the blank. The better understanding you and I have of each generation, the better equipped we are to thrive in today's multi-generational marketplace. But keep in mind, today and moving forward in the future, when you find yourself engaged in conversation around generations, keep in mind and don't forget, they're clues, they're not absolutes. So here's a breakdown of the generations that make up the workforce. This is as of 2020. Millennials became the dominant generation in 2016 in the workforce, and now Generation Z represents about 8%, and Generation Z will be the fastest growing generation in the workforce for at least the next decade. And by 2025, this will be a makeup of the workforce. 3 out of 4 workers around the world will be of the emerging generations. Now, as you're absorbing this information, I think it's important to imagine, what does the 2025 workforce or workplace look like? Especially as more and more digital natives start stepping in decision-making roles, it's going to look much different, isn't it? And so that's why I love talking about the topic of generations, specifically the emerging generations, because I do believe they give us data points into what's next. So if we can understand their behaviors and understand where they're likely going to take the workforce, they can really equip us to position ourselves, our organization, our leadership, our communication, our marketing for the future. So this gives us a little bit of context on where we're headed as it relates to the generations in the workforce. Let's do another poll. You shouldn't have to hit the refresh button. You shouldn't even have to hit the back button. You should now see this showing up on whatever device you're using. And if you're just now joining us, visit the link at the top of this visit the link at the top of this slide, and you'll be able to chime in live with us as well. So I'm curious, what do you think goes in the blank here? 52% of workers say they're the least likely to get along with someone from another blank. Of course, planet is the tongue-in-cheek response here. But man, every day that goes by, I feel like that's becoming more and more of a reality. All right, overwhelmingly, it looks like most of you are all in or think that background is the correct answer when the correct answer actually isn't up there. I didn't give you it. And that's the only time I'm going to do this to this fine bunch of individuals. And the reason I took out the correct answer is because I wanted to make a very poignant point, because the correct answer is actually generations. I know many of you saw that train coming. So yes, actually generation trumps all of these other diversity metrics as causing the most tension in the workforce. If you remember those three statistics I gave you at the top of our time together, there's a lot of tension around generations. So yes, 52% of workers say they're least likely to get along with someone from another generation. And unfortunately, my friends, this is a trend that is not slowing down, as 62% of Generation Z anticipate challenges working with baby boomers and Gen X, yet only 5% of Gen Z anticipate challenges working with millennials. So the data here is very clear. There is a gap between the established generations and the emerging generations. And if we're first not aware that that gap exists, and then you and I aren't equipped with strategies to close that gap, you and I are going to find ourselves more and more disconnected from the folks that we lead, from the folks that we work alongside, from the folks that we interact with in our families and the community. So the goal today is to understand that this, appreciate and have awareness that this gap exists, and then gain some strategies to close that gap. Here's another reason why we're experiencing more generational friction than ever before, and it's depicted wonderfully in this video clip. Take a look.
Of like grandkids equals free tech support.
Oh, Lord. Oh, look at you. So great to see you. None of this works. Come on in.
No matter what generation you're a part of, you can identify with this situation, can't you? And it depicts a seismic shift here, because for the first time ever, all right, track with me here. For the first time ever, we have an emerging generation that has skills and knowledge that previous generations don't have. That's the first time this has ever happened. That emerging generation has skills and knowledge that previous generations don't have. And so as they enter the workforce, there's been tension, and it started with millennials. And you see it depicted in this clip, the millennials, and of course, in this example, these are Gen Zers. They were helping mom and dad and grandma, grandpa troubleshoot a laptop, how to use Facebook, what TikTok was, etc. And now that same dynamic is following them into the workforce. And there's this tension because they grew up as the chief technology officers of their home. So it's a key that we understand these dynamics. And again, if you are experiencing generational friction, you are not alone, because there are some new dynamics at play. And again, the goal here is to give you some strategies to close that gap. All right, let's talk a little about generational needs and why they're more similar than different. Human needs, regardless of age, have remained relatively unchanged for centuries. Here's a good example by my friend Britt Andrietta, who's a neuroscience expert and author on the topic. And she's essentially boiled down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you remember studying that in school, that really humans have three needs. And here they are. The first being survive. The question we ask ourselves is, do I have food, water, and shelter? Once we satisfy that need, we can move up to the next need, which is to belong. The question we're asking ourselves is, am I contributing? Am I valued amongst the tribe, amongst my team? Once we can satisfy that, then we can move up to the pinnacle need, which is to become. Am I living my full potential? I love this because it's so simple, and yet we can trace all of human behavior back to these three needs. So yes, human needs, regardless of age, have remained relatively unchanged for centuries. But, big but here that our conversation revolves around, how humans fill these needs is rapidly changing, and it varies across generations. And so if you think back to our ancestors who roamed the plains, they couldn't get out of the survive stage, right? They were constantly thinking, where does my next meal need to come from? Where is shelter? Where is water? And what's that rustling in the bush over there, right? They were just stuck there. But you and I now, we have different needs, and we're elevating, we're moving up this pyramid of needs, aren't we? And so this upward trajectory that you and I are experiencing, well, it's changing how we work. It's shifting workers' expectations, especially with the emerging generations, as we'll soon see. And it's redefining the employer-employee relationship. I bet many of you are experiencing your employees, or especially this emerging generation, looking to leaders, looking to the organization, looking to the employer to help them with things that weren't addressed in the past, such as mental health needs, et cetera. And it's all because we're moving up, which is a good thing, right? We're moving up the needs pyramid here. All right, so take this one step further. Again, we're talking about generational needs. They're much more similar than different, but it's the how that makes all the difference. So here's the 4 major generations in the workforce, and let's just take 3 examples of various needs, and we'll see how the how plays out differently across each generation. So communication, that's a need for all of us, but for boomers, they need background info details. Gen X want to keep it professional. Millennials, efficient, mobile first. Gen Z, mobile only, video and voice command. Training, that's a need that we all have, right? Boomers on the job and classroom. Gen X define it more as e-learning. Millennials, micro and on demand. Gen Z, it's mobile, just in time, virtual reality, augmented reality. And then lastly, feedback. Boomers, no news is good news. Gen X approach feedback from a annual reviews angle. Millennials, routine check-ins, and Gen Z, 360-degree real-time feedback. So again, these differences, they're not wrong, they're just different, right? And each generation, because of how they've grown up and the different environments that they've grown up in, they have certain expectations, they have certain knowledge and skill sets, and they lean into and they approach things differently. So it's the how is the big difference here, and that's what's creating so much difference and so much distance between generations these days. So let's talk briefly about generational bias, and then we're going to move into some of the strategies. So how to overcome it? Well, to address this, I love to look at the quote from Abraham Lincoln, who once said, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." What a wonderful quote as it relates to overcoming not just generational bias, but any bias. And here's what I know you know, but it's worth stating again. There's a wealth of information today, but there's a poverty of understanding, isn't there? And in today's high flux, info inundated and multi-generational world, it demands that we seek more understanding. Now, this is hard for you and I, because as humans, our brain loves to conserve energy. And so our brain likes to jump to conclusions. Most of us could read an entire book where a lot of the words are taken out and some of the letters aren't even complete, because your brain will fill in the blanks for us because it wants to conserve energy. But when we're dealing with people and we're trying to overcome bias, that's a hindrance, right? Because when our brain jumps to conclusions, there's a lot that can be misconstrued, a lot that can be assumed that's wrong, frankly. So it's hard. And for you and I, we have to fight against our own human nature and what our brain wants to do to remain more open-minded. And that's more imperative than ever before, to remain open-minded about what's possible for our organization, where the industry is going, all kinds of different things. So at the end of the day, if you don't like that view, that technology, that policy, or for our conversation today, that generation, you've got to get to know it better. Take a note from Abraham Lincoln. If you don't understand it, if you don't like it even, try to move closer to understand it. And it's likely that you'll find a deeper connection or deeper awareness or appreciation for that item. So to sum this up, overcome generational bias, we have to be more curious and less certain. More curious and less certain. Again, this is difficult because we got to fight human nature, and it takes more effort to be more curious and less certain. But I think we can all agree this would serve us well in how we lead, how we structure organizations, and how we vision cast for the industry or for our teams. All right, my friends, we talked about generations. Who are they? Now let's move into some specific strategies that you and I can do to help us work and lead better across generations. And then don't forget, we're going to be doing a virtual competition where you can win a copy of my book. The winner will win a copy. And then we'll be doing some Q&A at the end as well. So let's jump into the strategies. And let's kick it off here. Let's talk about the 3 must-haves at work for the emerging generations. Here they are. Number 1, they want a better boss. Top talent view effective leaders as a must. Number 2, they want a brighter future. Top talent have a proclivity to be future-oriented. And number 3, they want a bigger vision. Top talent want to connect work with impact. Now, you might be looking at these 3 things, thinking to yourself this very question. You might be thinking, Ryan, doesn't every generation want these 3 things in a job? Like, why is this specific to the emerging generations? And that's a great question. And my short answer to that question is Yes. I think if we boil it down, these are the three things we're all looking for at work. But here's the big generational wrench. For previous generations, these three things were nice to haves. However, for the emerging generations, these three things are conditions of employment, where if they don't get a sense that an organization has these three things, if they're not getting these things at their current organization, they're literally a finger swipe away from going somewhere else. And so today's exponential times and the fast and quickly evolving marketplace that we all find ourselves operating, it's demanding more out of us to deliver for our teams and our employees, and especially the emerging generations has elevated expectations for just that. All right, let's do another poll. This is your personal preference that I'm curious about. What is your preferred method of communication at work? If there was just one channel in which you could communicate at work, what would be your personal preference? And if you're just now joining us, if you visit the link at the top of this slide, you'll be able to vote as well. You'll just seamlessly enter the polling system, and I'd love to hear from you as well. So overwhelmingly here, over half of you say face-to-face. And I'm not sure if that would be the same pre-COVID or if it's just that we're also starved for more face-to-face, that's why that response is so high. But nonetheless, face-to-face, email are the top. But everyone on here, we all have different preferences. The other, I'm always curious about. I wish I could open the lines and hear everybody. That other, I don't know if that's smoke signals or what else you're thinking about when it comes to other. But here, again, this is your personal preference, so no right or wrong answer here, but this is interesting nonetheless. But here's why I asked this question, because I wanted to elevate your blood pressure just slightly. Because look at all the different channels in which you and I have to think through and consider when we're trying to communicate with someone else today. Just in this live webinar right now, there is 7, potentially 8 different preferences of how people want to communicate. So if you want to effectively connect and communicate with someone, you have to likely think through all these different channels. That's complicated. And this is fairly new. All these different ways in which to communicate is fairly new to humanity. And so to increase the complexity here, now we overlay that multiple generations have different preferences, and now communication is becoming a very, very tough animal to tackle. So let's look at some of this, and I'm gonna give you one strategy to help you navigate this. So we're gonna look at the 4 major generations in the workforce and how they approach communication, because it's very different. Their summary for boomers is formal and direct, Gen X informal and flexible, millennials authentic and fast, Gen Z transparent and highly visual. Their view of communication, boomers face-to-face, phone and email, Gen X email, text, Facebook, millennials text, chat, email, Instagram, Gen Z it's Snapchat, TikTok, FaceTime, YouTube, WhatsApp, Twitch, and face-to-face. We can address that in the Q&A if you'd like on how Gen Z wants to connect more via face-to-face. And then lastly, their attitude towards communication. Boomers need background info and details. Gen X want to keep it professional. Millennials efficient and mobile first. Gen Z mobile only, video and voice command. Think about them. Generation Z, they can't really remember a world where they have been outside of speaking distance from a AI-enabled piece of technology. So voice command is very top of mind for them. So you can see how the communication preferences have changed across the generations. So let me give you one example of how communication breaks down across generations. Now, let's say you had, and this is hypothetical, because I know this is a bright bunch of individuals, but just go with me here for illustration purposes. Let's say you had the great idea, or you thought it was going to be a productive use of your time to call a Gen Zer. Here's how that would work for you. You'd pull out your phone, you'd open the phone application, you'd dial the phone number. It would ring once and go immediately to voicemail. Why? Because on the other end of that Gen Zer sees the phone ring, has no idea what that function is on their phone, quickly hits decline, and they're thinking to themselves, phew, I had no idea my phone was a phone. I'm glad I didn't have to deal with that. So you're on the other side, it rings once, goes right to voicemail. You begin leaving your voicemail because it's either not set up or it's full, right? Those are the two options when the voicemail finally picks up. Hopefully it's just not set up so you're able to leave a voicemail. You begin to leave your voicemail. In the middle of that voicemail from the Gen Zer that you just called, you receive. Now you're a little frustrated because clearly that person isn't on an airplane or in the shower. They were in a position where they could communicate and they intentionally declined your phone call. You let your anger dissipate. You go back to your voicemail. You complete the voicemail and you think to yourself, that was a really good 2.5-minute voicemail. I'm going to make sure they know that all the information they could ever possibly need is in that voicemail. So you quickly text them back, send it off. And just as you're about to go on about your day thinking this is all wrapped up and behind you, you receive that text message. And now you are back to square one, my friend. Like that was a complete waste of your time, right? So just know if you decide to leave a voicemail for a Gen Zer, it will die a lonely death in a sea of unheard voicemails, because why would they check yours when they've never checked their voicemails? What makes your voicemail so precious and important? Speaking of long voicemails, my mom has a podcast. And if any of you are looking for a new podcast to subscribe to, I would encourage you to do so. And all you would actually need is just the passcode to my voicemail box. And then you too could listen to my mom's riveting podcast episodes. Okay, just a little bit of a generational joke there. Hopefully some of you got that. All right, so if you find yourself in a situation similar to what we just depicted there in that last slide, I want to offer up this strategy to defer your communications. Use generations as clues. So for example, if you're going to connect with a Gen Zer, you're not going to call them, you're not going to leave them a voicemail, because we now know how that ends up. So you might want to actually defer to texting. Vice versa is true. If the emerging generations are trying to communicate up, you're definitely not going to want to DM them on social or try to set up a group meet. You might want to actually pick up the phone or schedule a face-to-face. Adjusting our communications is the new norm. And you saw it in that slide that the last poll that we did. There's 8 different preferences just engaged in this webinar today that people have. So we have to get better and more agile in our communications to defer to those. Let me say it this way. It's no longer about how we want to communicate. It's about how the communicatee is best suited to absorb that information. So here's a good example of this. Canvas is the world's first text-based interview platform, and it shifts recruiters' conversations to the preferred channel of Gen Z candidates, which is texting. So I work with I have a lot of clients really in just about every industry, but last year we did a lot of work in the retail space, and there was a lot of organizations that were hiring Gen Zers into their storefronts, trying to work in the front lines. And they were pulling their hair because they couldn't get Gen Zers to answer recruiter emails or phone calls. And so, they could have just kept emailing and could have just kept calling and pounded their fist on the table saying, shouldn't these Gen Zers, answer communication if they're interested in this job? And the answer is yes, they should. But that's not going to help them to get a response, right? Instead, they have to defer their communications. So they've started to use the product Canvas that's described here, where the entire first interview happens solely via text message. Response rates went above 80%, and they were all of a sudden able to establish a relationship, and then they could move the conversation to a phone call, face-to-face, video interview, whatever it might have been. But it's a great example of how organizations are using certain tools to defer their communications in order to establish that connection. All right, my friends, let's do another poll to tee up our second strategy. 74% of Gen Z believe jobs should have blank. What do you think? All right. Give a couple more seconds here for folks to chime in. There's a case to be made for any one of these, really, but the correct answer here is greater meaning. Greater meaning. So let's unpack that. We're talking about work, and we're going to come back to this idea of greater meaning in just a minute. But let's do the same thing that we did with communication, but now with work. Here are the 4 major generations and how they approach work. Their summary: boomers, it's a place; Gen X, a means to an end; millennials, a vehicle; Gen Z, life. Gen Z's having a really hard time figuring out, where does work end and where does my life pick up, especially as they're going to move into a much more hybrid and flexible work arrangements on the other side of this pandemic. To them, it's not just work and life, it's all just life. Their view of work: boomers, a responsibility; Gen X, to drive outcomes; millennials, fulfilling; Gen Z, earn and learn. And then lastly, their attitude towards work: boomers, loyalty is rewarded; Gen X, work hard, play hard; millennials want to work smart; and Gen Z want to work fluidly. If you have questions about working fluidly, we can address those in the Q&A as well. But this gives you a good perspective of how the preferences around work change across generations. So I'm going to give you 4 examples here, and I just want you to think to yourself, think in your head, what these 4 things have in common. Are you ready? Here we go. Scholarship fundraisers felt more motivated to secure donations when they had contact with scholarship recipients. Number 2, lifeguards were more vigilant after reading stories about people whose lives have been saved by lifeguards. Number 3, cooks were more motivated and worked harder when they saw those who would be eating their food. And number 3, radiologists were more accurate reading x-rays when showing a picture of the patient. My friends, what do these 4 items or examples have in common? Normally I get the pleasure of being in the same room with people. Of course, this year it's all been virtual, but if I was able to capture some of your responses, most of you would be on the right track. But here's specifically what these 4 things and what we're looking to unpack right now. Workers connected to the people benefiting from their labor. That's the common thread here. And when workers are connected to the people benefiting from their labor, as we've seen in all 4 of these examples, it improves performance. So what are we to do with this? Well, that leads us to our next strategy around work, which is to identify the beneficiaries of the labor. Connecting workers to the beneficiaries of the work creates more engagement, motivation, and allows employees to transcend their task lists. So remember that a stat we did, 74% of Gen Z's looking for more meaning at work. So this is a great way to engage that generation, because you can draw a straight line from the work that they're doing to the people that's benefiting from their work. But this is a generationally agnostic tool. This is a human thing, right? We're wanting to have more value in our work. We're wanting to move up the trajectory and move from belong to become, if you remember our 3 needs pyramid. So let's give this even more meat, and I want to cover how to identify the beneficiaries. And you simply ask why repeatedly. That's how you identify the beneficiaries. So here's how it might look. If you were talking to a group of individuals that cleaned hotel rooms, here's how this would work. You'd ask them, why do you clean hotel rooms? And they'd tell you, because that's what my boss tells me to do. Very, just top of mind, what they'd say, right? That's kind of the easiest response. Then you got to ask why, again, to peel back the layers. So you'd say, why does that matter? Because it keeps the rooms from getting dirty. Why does that matter? Because it makes the rooms more sanitary and more pleasant. Why does that matter? Because it provides a clean space for customers to relax and rejuvenate. If we can ask why enough, we can start to uncover the beneficiaries of our labor. That might be external from the institution or the organization that we're a part of. There's also beneficiaries internally. There might be tasks or procedures that we do that don't bring us a lot of joy and we don't like doing. But if we can start peeling back the layers and figuring out the reason I do this is because it benefits XYZ person over here and enables them to do this work well. So if we can start to identify the beneficiaries of the labor, we'll not only see our own productivity soar, but that of our organization as well, cross-generationally. All right, my friends, this is our last poll before I've got one more strategy for you. Then we're going to jump into the virtual competition. So if you haven't got one right, this is your shot. I've got a lot of faith. But what do you think goes in the blank here? The emerging generations want blank 50% more often than other employees. The correct answer here is, and most of you got it, feedback. Feedback is the correct answer. And this is normally at the point too where you guys have figured out that there is a clear response button. So if you got the wrong answer, and now that I've told you the right one, which is feedback, you can clear your response and you can go get the right response. There you go. Some of you are taking me, a whole lot of you are taking me up on that. Some of you are still chiming in with the wrong answer. Again, you're probably testing to see if this is live, and though these are actually your responses. And these are actually your responses. All right, very good. Half of you got it right. Well done, feedback. And let's address feedback now. And where does feedback normally come from? It comes from managers, leaders, right? So let's first cover leadership. How does the 4 major generations approach leadership? And here's how they approach it. Boomers, their summary is authoritative. Gen X, hierarchy. Millennials, coaching. Gen Z, networked. We can talk about that one in the questions as well. Got a lot baiting you guys with a lot of different topics to cover in the questions. Their view of leadership, boomers are in the sage stage. Gen X are Sherpas, millennials, soldiers, Gen Z, students. So boomers are in the sage stage. They're sharing their wisdom. Gen X are Sherpas. They've been to the top of the leadership mountain. Now they're coming back down to rise up the next generation of leaders. Millennials are soldiers. They're a few 1, 2, 3 time leaders, and they're still being tested on how best to lead or if they want to continue to lead. And Gen Z, of course, are just students. They're thinking about how they might lead and if they're going to lead and how best they might lead. And their attitude towards leadership, boomers, no news is good news. Gen X, semi-annual reviews. Millennials, routine check-ins, and Gen Z, 360-degree real-time feedback. So let's talk about feedback. And I want to quickly discuss and prove to you why quality feedback elevates performance. Feedback is so important in today's workforce, and especially as we look at it from through a generational lens, there's lots of different preferences and perspectives as it relates to feedback. So recently, there was a study done where they took a group of 7th graders and they tasked these 7th graders to write an essay. So they all had the same task of writing an essay. They all wrote those essays, they turned them in, and then the teachers randomly divided those essays up into 2 piles, Group A and Group B. On the Group A pile of essays, they gave this feedback. They said, I'm giving you these comments so that you'll have feedback on your paper. Not a whole lot of meat there, but when they gave that feedback on Group A papers, it resulted in 40% of students revising and resubmitting their papers. Not a bad outcome, but certainly a lot of room for improvement, right? On Group B, they gave this feedback. They said, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know you can reach them. When the teachers gave this feedback, it resulted in 80% of students revising and resubmitting their papers, and they made twice as many corrections as Group A. So what happened here? Let me break it down for you. High standards plus assurance in the feedback resulted in doubling the performance. Just those 2 simple items resulted in doubling the performance. Now, many of you lead teams or are part of organizations that have much more sophisticated and complicated teammates and employees than 7th graders. Some of you, right? So we need to take a little bit step further. So here is the feedback formula I'd like to share with you today. And that is high standards plus assurance. We saw how that doubles performance, but we've also got to include direction and support. These are the 4 items that make up the feedback formula that's really effective and works across generations. So here's how it might look. You might say, I have high expectations of you. I know you can meet them. So try this new challenge, fill in the blank, whatever that is. And if you fail, I'll help you recover. That, my friends, is the recipe for effective feedback that elevates performance. So the last strategy I want to share with you today is to try the feedback formula. And there it is again. So use this formula to inspire belief, transform work ethic, and instill confidence among a team. And if you don't feel it just yet, the emerging generations and Gen Z will be no different as they come into the workforce, are going to be looking for more feedback. And we saw from the data in the last poll, the emerging generation is craving more feedback. So finding tools and ways to deliver more and better feedback is going to serve you well as it relates to leading across generations. All right, so we talked about generations. I gave you some strategies. Before we move into the Q&A, I'd like to do a competition with you. So this is going to be fun. It's very easy and seamless. Here's how it works. If you visit pollev.com/live poll, so it's the same link we've been using this whole presentation. So just stay right there if you've been with us. If you haven't been interacting with the polls and are ready to join us, visit that link and you'll be ready to go. So the goal here is to answer correctly as fast as you can. And the winner, as I mentioned, will receive a hard copy of my book. And the last thing to note, when I start the competition, you will be randomly assigned a player ID, and that's how you'll be able to track where you are on the leaderboard. It's gonna be a lot of fun. You guys ready? Here we go. Again, answer as fast as you can. You'll have 15 seconds to answer each poll. There'll be a timer on the screen, but I don't think there's a timer on your device. So just know, answer as fast as you can. Here we go. First question is, generations are blank, not blank. All right, very good. Time is up. Over 94% of you got that right. Fantastic. Let's see how the leaderboard shakes out. This always happens. There's a huge tie for first. This lead will narrow quickly. It's still anybody's game. Here's your second question. All right, time is up. Correct answer here is curious, certain. 76% of you got it. Way to go. Still big tie for number one here. Here's your next question. Correct answer is survive, belong, become. 66% got it. Great job. Now we're down to 2. All right, but look at this. It is a close game. We still have a few questions. Anybody's game. Here's your next question. All right, correct answer was 77%. Most of you got it correct. But I did mention, I covered this data point before I told you there was a competition. So usually that throws people off. So here, where are we at here? Wow, we've got a clear winner, or clear leader, I should say. Guess 824. But again, wow, really close. Anybody's game. Here's our next question. Correct answer is better boss, brighter future, bigger vision. Most of you got it. Really well done. Almost 100% of you. All right. Oh, now we've got now back to a tie. All right. I think we just have a couple more questions. Here's your next question. Correct answer is be more curious and less curious, because the correct is be more curious, less certain. Little tricky there, but hopefully that narrowed it down, and we have a clear winner, guest 400 by a narrow margin. But you are the winner, my friend. Here is how you claim your book. Simply screenshot that you are the first place winner. Of course, if you're using your phone, just double click on the sides to screenshot it, or take a picture of your desktop if you'd prefer, and email that to me with your physical address to my email address there, ryan@ryan-jenkins.com, and then I will ship you a book. Hopefully that was a fun way to recap the insights that we covered today and got you engaged, and hopefully maybe expand your mind on how you can use virtual presentations to really engage an audience as well. But congrats to guest 400, I believe. Take action on these steps and I'll be sending you a book. All right, everyone, let's jump into some questions now. We're going to be using the same polling function, so you should be able to pull that up now, submit your questions, and then anybody can vote. Vote on whichever question that you would like me to answer. We've got a lot of people engaged today, so upvote any questions that you'd like me to answer, and that way I'm answering the most burning questions in the minds of the audience. So as you're putting in those questions, quick recap here is we want to, these are the strategies that we covered. Remember, we talked about communication, how to defer your communications. It's no longer about how you want to communicate. It's about how the communicatee is most likely and best suited to receive that information. And we talked a lot about work and how to identify the beneficiaries of the labor, right? The goal here is to draw a straight line from the work we do to the people benefiting from our work. That increases engagement and performance. And remember, Gen Z is looking for greater meaning at work. So if we can help them to do this better, we'll see better engagement, more satisfaction at work from that generation. And then lastly, the leadership, try the feedback formula. I gave you a very specific formula that has been proven to elevate performance. So use that, especially as more and more generations, especially the emerging generations, are looking for more feedback. All right, my friends, let me get to these questions. And don't forget, you can stay connected with me. If you want to grab copies of the book, if you didn't win the competition, you can visit my website there. If you want to explore working together, you can reach out to me at that website as well. Thanks for all your time and attention. We're going to address as many questions as I can. Then I've got a closing video and a closing thought to wrap our conversation up. And Julia, I know you're out there somewhere. Feel free to chime in if there's any questions that you are receiving on your end that you would think would be worth me addressing. But overwhelmingly here, the first question here is, how do cultural and race differences intersect with the generational characteristics you described? Yeah, great question. What's really fascinating about generations is specifically now Generation Z. Generation Z is the most diverse generation of all time. And so as they're going to come into the workforce and make a bigger dent in the workforce, we're just going to have a much more diverse workforce than ever before. So that's something that's really interesting and something we need to keep in mind. The other interesting thing too is I get this question from the standpoint too of globally, the conversations that we had, some of the strategies, can we use these globally, across cultures? And the answer is yes. And why we're starting to able to do that is because mobile technology has unified us. And if we look at Generation Z, they have more in common with their global peers than any other generation before them. And why is that? Well, they've been able to jump on Xbox, put on an earpiece, and game alongside someone in real time that was halfway around the world. So borders and barriers that separated previous generations are starting to erode, and we're now connected, and we're able to experience live events together in real time around the globe. And so Gen Z last year was in Dubai, helping an organization understand how they figure out how to market to the Gen Zers in the Middle East and North Africa part of the world. And it was just astounding how similar they were to American Gen Zers. And so it's really, really pretty compelling. So expect to see more of that. every young generation, I think they're going to become more and more diverse, and they're going to become more and more like their global peers. And I think that's good news, especially if our goal is to create more diverse organizations. So that was a lot to unpack. Hopefully that helps with the first conversation there. All right, the next one was, what do you mean by fluidity for Gen Z? I have hosted a podcast for the last 4 or 5 years now, and we interview Fortune 500 leaders on how they're preparing for the future of work. And one of the top responses we get is these organizations, these very forward-thinking and innovative organizations, are trying to figure out how do they make work more fluid. These were conversations we were having before COVID, and I imagine now, amid all this is just going to accelerate all these conversations. But here's what the data is telling us, that millennials tended to job hop, and can't blame them because they had opportunities at their fingertips that have never been available. So they could find new opportunities and just jump ship, and it really wasn't a big deal, and job hopping didn't have the same stigma as it once did. The early research is telling us that Gen Z won't be job hoppers. They're interested in being role hoppers. So they're interested in having different roles within an organization, sometimes throughout weekly, right? They might spend some time in marketing, some spend time in accounting, a little bit of time in legal, whatever it might be. So this is a real trend that we're seeing. And so many organizations are trying to figure out, how do we start making work more fluid? How do we start enabling people to work more throughout the organization and to have more fluidity throughout the organization? Because Gen Z, what's very top of mind for them is they're going to have some of the longest careers in human history. And so they know they're going to have to gain transferable skills to stay relevant and continuously be producing in the very high flux marketplace that they're operating in. And so they're looking to start trying new things throughout an organization and to gain those transferable skills. So all that is what is meant by why Gen Z is looking for more work fluidness. All right, next question here is, how do employees in emerging generations gain respect or be taken seriously from those who are older? Yes, great question. And as you saw at the top, those 3 did you know statistics, there is a lot of friction around different work expectations and younger employees managing older employees. But one of the best strategies I can offer to folks, especially young leaders who are managing older generations on their team, is to adopt a coaching mindset. And here's the essence of coaching. Coaching is very simple. It's hard to do, but it's very simple. In coaching, the essence of coaching is you resist advice giving and you ask more questions. You resist advice giving and you ask more questions. Now that's really easy, or should be easier, for emerging generations to ask to do that, right? Because they likely don't have the experience or preference, or the experiences or answers that more established generations might have. So they can hold their tongue more. They've got to get good at asking the right questions. And so I think that's a leadership strategy that would work for anybody. If you get better at asking questions and holding your tongue, that's going to suit you well, no matter where and how you lead. But specifically for the emerging generations who want to influence up or want to gain respect up, is to resist advice giving and ask more questions. And if you're asking thoughtful and timely questions, you can gain enormous amount of respect, especially if it starts drawing out of the team or the organization the responses that are needed to navigate today's very challenging work environment. Hopefully that's helpful. Checking the time. I'll probably have time for one more.
Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Julia.
Hi. We have a lot of questions coming in on the other end, so I thought I'd jump in with a few of those questions as well. These are great questions here, but if you would like me to throw you a few that we have as well.
Please.
This one I thought was great, from a recent grad. He's 22 years old. He's about to start a job in January. And he wants to know, he said he'll be the youngest on the team by 8 to 10 years. Any tips on navigating the workplace as the first Gen Z to be working on a team of Millennials and Gen Xers?
Yeah, I mean, that relates to our last question there. And I would say, ask as many questions as you can, right? Ask questions, hold your tongue. There'll probably be things that you see or opportunities where you see things that could be done more efficiently, or and that's not because you're of a different generation. It just means that fresh eyes often bring a certain level of scrutiny, or you can see things that others haven't because we're often held back by the prevailing model, right? So ask a lot of questions, and then there was a lot of stigma with millennials and their work ethic, right? And whether you believe that to be true or not, Gen Z is likely going to get some of that stigma as well. But use that to advantage, right? People are going to have low expectations of how hard you might work based off of millennials and other Gen Zers. And so really intensifying or working above and beyond, going the extra mile can really set you far and above. And the entitlement thing becomes a thing too, and you might start hearing that from other generations as well. And that's just kind of natural, right? I mean, as we age, we tend to gain maturity, have more perspective, and gain experience, and we can have a certain level of maturity and wisdom that comes there. But think about if you're getting met with any entitlement aspects or labels, always approach it from nothing's earned, everything has to be. Nothing is owed, everything's earned. Nothing is owed, everything's earned. And change anything to I deserve a raise, or I deserve this role, or I deserve to work on this project, to I'm responsible for proving I can do this. I'm responsible for meeting the objectives so I can get promoted. So changing some of the dynamic or how you view things, as far as changing from I deserve to I'm responsible for, I think will also serve you well to do well in the organization. Hopefully it was helpful. Julie, you got one more, and then I'll got that video, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, I have another one. This one comes from a boomer. She says she's a boomer with a millennial boss who keeps asking when she will retire. She also talks to other colleagues about when she should be retiring, and she feels like this is becoming harassment. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, send him this recording of this webinar, I hope. Yeah, I mean, we all have to start adapting or understanding that every generation brings tremendous value to the table, and it's the diverse teams that truly innovate, right? That is the golden ticket as it relates to diversity on a team, is that you're able to innovate faster and reduce risk because you have varying perspectives. Right? If you're trying to attack a problem and you've got a highly generationally diverse team, you're able to see things that other generations can't see. You're able to attack a problem from a different perspective. Thus, it accelerates innovation and it reduces risk. So the more that we can understand that we need every generation, and currently there's 4 generations in the workforce, the more that we can have those perspectives and insights on the team, the better suited we are to really move the ball forward in all kinds of different aspects. And I think the last thing I'll say too is, we should not be wanting to change for a generation. We should always be trying to change in light of the current circumstances, or changing in light of today's exponential times. So things are changing fast today. They're not going to slow down. I think we all can agree on that. So we need to be really open-minded about how do we adapt to that, the future that's coming. And not think about it adapting for a generation. Let's think about adapting it in light of today's shifting marketplace. That was hopefully helpful as well. So let me wrap up with this question, this video that really encapsulates so much of what we talked about today. And then I have a closing thought and we'll be done. Take a look at this video and enjoy.
Proud of you, son. GE, manufacturer. Well, that's why I dug this out for you. It's your grandpappy's hammer, and he would have wanted you to have it.
It meant a lot to him.
Yes, GE makes powerful machines, but I'll be writing the code that will allow those machines to share information with each other. I'll be changing the way the world...
You can't pick it up, can you? Go ahead. You can't lift the hammer.
It's okay, though. You're going to change the world.
So many generational dynamics happening in that video. All right, my friends, this is always how we've done it mindset is a slippery slope to irrelevance. That's perhaps more true today than ever before. And what we need to do instead is we need to prioritize why over the way. So stated differently, we need to be married to the mission of the organization, but only date the approach, because the approach is ever evolving and constantly changing. So take GE in that clip. If they were prioritizing the way, the approach, well, then they'd have all their new hires be picking up a hammer and they would have been out of business a long time ago, right? Instead, they're actually prioritizing the why, and they're leaning into this new generation and tapping into those new skill sets, in this case of machine-to-machine learning. So all that to say, we should not ask, nor should we want other generations to work like previous generations. Instead, we need to be encouraging and equipping each other, every generation, to find the new frontiers of work and to find the new frontiers of your industry. Thank you for your time and attention. Reach out if I can help with anything else. Julia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. It was definitely an insightful and fun webinar today. We appreciate your time and everything that you've given us today. So thank you for that. And everybody, the recording will be available tomorrow. I know a lot of you are asking about the slides. So tomorrow, the recording will be available at the link that you are on today. And so you can get the slide presentation to rewatch and share. So